Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. If you tell me in 5 years that this conversation that you're about to hear was one of the most important conversations I would have in my life, I don't think you'd be wrong. Today's guest, Joe Pulizzi, has written a book called Content Inc. It's for anyone who wants to start a content-first business. And Joe believes we do that properly by first building the audience and then understanding what the audience wants for us and providing it with our own unique content tilt. We're going to dive into all of that in our conversation, and I hope it helps change you as much as it did me. Joe, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I want to start our conversation and make sure I capture what are some things that are motivating you in life right now, and what are 2 or 3 things you want to make sure that we get across to the listeners in our conversation today?
Well, that's a loaded question, Clint, but I'll try to unpack some of this. Well, first of all, I have 2 children that I'm highly motivated to make sure that they can be independent, loving, passionate people. So they are 18 and 20 years old now, both at university. So step 1 is we got them out of the house. Step 2, we'll see how, make sure they don't fail out and don't get their heart broken too badly, or maybe a little bit. That's okay. But yeah, it's interesting. When they went off to college, I put a note together, and it was going to be a very short note, and it ended up being 36 points of things I wanted them to take with them, which is me. And we'll talk about this during the episode. But it's interesting. I'm on my, I don't know, what is this, 3rd, 4th act of my career, starting in, just looking for a job, then starting in publishing, then figuring this thing called content marketing. And then I started writing mysteries and thrillers. And now I'm back to the content creator ball game, focusing on launched a whole new business, going down the rabbit hole with community tokens and NFTs and everything else. And what motivates me right now, I'm just honestly trying to help as many people as possible, Clint. I had my exit. I was blessed. My wife and I exited the business in 2016. It worked out very well financially. We're set. So from that perspective, great. Now we're going through, how can we help the most amount of people with our foundation, Orange Effect Foundation, with the business, the tilt. And so that's what I'm concerned about. We've got people that work in the business that we care about. We've got our audience that we care about. And I'm trying to help everyone, kind of get to the next level. And it's also a challenge at the same time. Like, I didn't want to retire. But people are like, oh, no, what are you doing? Working again? I'm like, yeah. I want challenges. What's the next big project? Bring it on. What can I do to make an impact? Could I write mysteries and thrillers? Yes. Would that make a huge impact on the world? Probably not. I mean, it did okay. My novel. Where can I make more of an impact? I think this thing that I'm calling content entrepreneurship. I have a little bit of experience. I can help more people. So that's kind of where my head's at right now.
And I can echo, having read the book, I was just bursting with ideas where I was doing things wrong, where I was doing things right, how to tilt things in a different direction. So we're going to work our way through all of that. But let's start by going back in time. You hit on a little bit of it. It was 2007, and you left a 6-figure job as an executive to start your own business. At the time, you had 2 young children. Joe, can you take our listeners through what that was like and what was going through your mind when you made the decision that you were going to start a business effectively based around, like you're saying, content?
Yeah, I was lucky to fall into a department at a large business-to-business publishing company that basically was content marketing. It was called custom media or custom publishing at the time. And I, through weird events, which always happens, I ended up running that department. And the only reason I ended up running that department is the company, the publishing company, it was in financial distress in 2001 and 2. And I was left. As I remember when I started at the company in 2000, there were 8 people between me and the CEO at the time. And 18 months later, I was reporting to the CEO. Not because I'm great or anything, but because we lost all those people and I was cheap. So I was making nothing at the time. And they're like, okay, they didn't care about the custom media department at all. They're like, throw this kid. They wanted to sell advertising, events, what big publishing companies at the time did. So I got lucky with that one and then started to see all these trends happen. I mean, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I was at the first meeting where Google came in. This is in 02 or 03 into our publishing company because there was a discussion about whether or not the publishers wanted their websites to be crawled anymore. Like that was an actual thing. We go back there, you're like, what? Did that happen? And we started to see, oh my gosh, we had all these companies we were working with, Microsoft and Autodesk, and they had to learn how to tell their own story especially with search engines, with social media on the rise. They had to figure out, okay, well, it's not just interruption anymore. We actually have to have something valuable to say. We've got all these channels to say it in. What's the value of having an audience? And then, of course, there's a lot of value with it. I started calling it content marketing because we were targeting marketers. I was selling basically custom magazine services, website services, content, and they didn't understand custom publishing. They were falling asleep by the time I ended up saying publishing. But if you say content marketing, that intrigued chief marketing officers. It's like, oh, search marketing, direct marketing, content marketing. Oh, yeah, that's a thing. We better do that. Or maybe we are doing that. And I thought it was going to be big business. So by 2006, so I've been running the department for, let's say, 4 or 5 years now. And by 2006, I was like, I think I want to start my own thing. There was a company out there called Agency Finder. I actually think they're still around today. And I said, oh my gosh. Basically, they were a matchmaking site for agencies to be matched up with brands that needed agencies. And I'm like, oh, we could do that for content marketing. And I'm like, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to create that business. I'm going to go out there. And I was talking about it and I was getting things ready and I was thinking about a logo and whatever. And I was just incessantly bringing it up all the time. And my wife literally said, this is the end of 2006. She said, look, Joe, either stop talking about it or do it. Just fine. I'm fine with it, but you have to pick. You can't just talk about this forever. So I said, I'll tell you what, by the end of March 2007, I will have left the company and I will go start this thing and do this. If you're on the same page as me, we'll get this thing going. So on the last day of March 2007, I left the company, started a thing that was called Junta 42. We don't even have to get into why I called it Junta 42. I thought it was this hip Web 2.0 name. Basically, it was going to be the eHarmony for content marketing. And so that's, up to that point, left a little bit crazy, a little bit nuts, which as you know, all entrepreneurs are, and took the jump. And then there was then there's 2.5 years of feeling like a failure. But at that point, I made the decision and we lived on bologna and ramen noodles for a while.
And when would you say, because we know by 2011 you started to hit good numbers. And so you're saying for 2.5 years it was rough. And you've written Content Inc. and you've built your business and your model around that. But when did you, Joe, hit on the Content Inc. concept and start to apply it in your own business, which I'm assuming was the driver of your success?
Yes, it was September of 2009. So there's your 2.5 year.
2.5 years. Okay.
Half-year mark. So basically, long story short, we were going forward with this model, but luckily at the same time, I started a blog called The Content Revolution, whereas about 3 to 4 times a week, I would post a very long blog post on the how-to of content marketing. So I was trying to do what I thought was best and get a blog, get it out there, get some traction for social, whatever. And September 2000, so I'm doing all that. In September 2009, the product had been around for about 1.5 years, Junta 42. We had a certain number of customers, but the moment hit when our best customer, and when I say our best customer, this is our best case study. So we had an agency in the Junta 42 system that paid full freight, which is about $5,000 a year. to be matched up leads and be sent leads for content marketing projects. And we didn't get a re-up. The credit card wasn't there for automatic rebilling. And I was like, well, this must be a mistake because, they landed, I think it was a $3 or $4 million deal out of our little matchmaking site. I was like, oh, of course they're going to re-up. So I called the president of the agency up. I was like, hey, just checking in, how you're doing? We didn't get the re-up here on the annual subscription. I just want to get your credit card and we'll take care of it and I'll leave you alone. And she said, no, we're not going to re-up. And I said, what? You're not going to re-up? She said, yeah. Can I ask why? And she said, yeah, we think we can get better ROI somewhere else. And I said, really? I'll call her Judy. And Jim's name was like, I said, really, Judy? I said, you can get better ROI? A $5,000 investment, you got a multi-million-dollar deal? I said, because if you can get better ROI somewhere else, tell me, and I'm going to invest in that. Because I don't think I could do any better. So anyways, we minced words. We didn't end do nicely because I was frustrated. Hung up the phone. It's funny, hung up the phone. I actually hung up the phone because I had that kind of phone.
A desk phone, yeah.
Yes, I had a desk phone, which is crazy to say. And I went outside completely feeling sorry for myself. I'm like, what have I done? I left that, as you said, this executive position. The kids were taken care of. We've been living on nothing for the last 2 years. We're losing money. And now this, I said, I am a complete failure. There's no way if I lose my best customer, this is going to work. So that was September. I went on for another couple weeks trying to figure out what I was going to do. I was getting my LinkedIn profile in shape. I was thinking about, okay, I'm going to have to go find a job somewhere because that's it. And then I remember, I don't know what I was drinking, Clint, but I had a cocktail napkin in front of me, but I remember this. And I hit the realization because that day or that night, I started going through my emails and I started looking at the feedback from the blog. And the feedback from the blog was, oh, Joe, we love the blog. Do you do any training, content marketing training for my large marketing team? Joe, do you do ongoing consulting? Joe, are there any large events for this industry that we could go to? And that's when it hit me, Clint. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm trying to shove this product that's terrible, that's not needed, down the throats of these customers, that's agencies that have no money. First of all, you never target a marketing agency owner for dollars because they're cheap. They don't spend any money on their own marketing. And that's what we were doing. But then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not listening to my audience. My audience is telling me they want training, they want consulting, and they'd like events. I'm like, why didn't I just do that? And luckily the blog over the 2.5 years was doing pretty well. We had over 10,000 subscribers at that point. I was getting a lot of traction. I was being called to be a keynote speaker on places. And so things were starting to hum from that perspective, but the business was broke. And so that's when back to the cocktail napkin, I'm writing as I'm talking to you. I put the 3 legs of the stool and I said, we are going to create the leading largest destination for content marketing education on the web. That was 1. 2 is we're going to create the leading industry magazine, print magazine in the industry. That was Chief Content Officer. And then the 3rd point, where we're going to create the leading largest in-person physical event in the world or something like that. And it was all around this thing called content marketing. Renamed everything from Junta 42 to Content Marketing Institute because I said that sounds like an educational institution. So we did that, launched in May 4th, I think, of 2010. It took off almost immediately. The whole name changed. The content marketing was really starting to go because I've been pushing it on the blog, on the Content Marketing Revolution blog for 2.5 years. And then we launched the magazine, Chief Content Officer, in January of 11. And then in September of 11, we launched Content Marketing World, the event. And we were hoping to get 100 people to Cleveland, Ohio. We got 660 to that event in Cleveland, of all places, my hometown. And then 4 years later, we had almost 4,000 people, still the largest physical event in the content marketing industry. And that's how the tide turned. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, how many people are out there that are just launching product first and failing, when if I would have just listened a little bit more and focused on building that audience and then listening to what my audience wanted to buy and then figuring out the business model after that, would have saved me a lot of pain. But the good news is the Content Inc. book came out of it, two editions of it. The whole business model came out of it. And now, I'm launching the new business the same way We've got no revenue. I mean, we've got ideas on revenue, but right now we're just in audience building stage and doing the same thing.
And so we're going to dive so much to chew through actually right there. And, you did that in 2010, 2011, you hit $1 million in top line revenue. Fast forward 2015, just shy of 10 million. And in 2016, you sold the business. And I believe you sold it for about $30 million, Joe. And you were settling into a new life, right? You mentioned earlier you're writing mystery novels. You didn't have to work again. And fast forward 2020, COVID hits. You start receiving some phone calls from friends, people you know who are losing their jobs. What was happening to them, Joe, and why were they reaching out? And why did that bring you back in to the game and make you realize we've got to do version 2 or edition 2 of the book?
March 8th, 2020 was the kickoff party for my novel, The Will to Die. That was my last public appearance in, I think it was 16 months or something like that. Isn't that strange? But so that happened. And so this is April. I'm working on the next edition because I'm like, that's what novelists do, right? They write the next verse. So I've got to keep this going. If we want this to be Harry Potter, I got to work it. I got to do what's the best way to sell the first novel, write a second novel and a third novel, right? So we do that. And then, it gets really bad for a lot of my friends as enterprise companies were letting people go. This is before they got all the cash and infusion and everything. People were scared. They didn't know what was going on. Everyone was staying at home. So I started to get some, as you said, some messages, texts from friends that were like, Joe, can you tell me about that Content Inc. thing you wrote in 2015? And does that model still work even with all the stuff going on today? And got an abnormal number of a lot of LinkedIn messages. Joe, can we talk? Can we Zoom together? Whatever it was at the time. I'd love to pick your brain on this stuff. I'm like, oh, that's strange. Okay, there's something going on here. And for whatever reason, I went into my old podcast stuff because I had 2 podcasts, This Old Marketing Podcast with Robert Rose, which was a content marketing news show, and Content Inc. podcast, which is based on the book. Same thing, the model, build your audience first, then product, and it's basically an entrepreneur's model. And I looked, and the podcast downloads are going up. I'm like, that's weird. This podcast hasn't been around for, 2 years? This doesn't happen, as you know. Like, you just don't start picking up unless you're doing some marketing behind it. We weren't. And then I sent a note to my publisher at McGraw-Hill, and I said, could you check the numbers on Content Inc., the book? Are they going up? And she said, yeah, it's strange. We are getting some more people to buy this book. I'm like, this is really weird. Like, I don't know what's going on, but there's something here that's happening. Maybe this is the time where the Content Inc. model really works, where you have a lot of weird things happen, pushing people at home. They're creating a lot of content. They're saying, hey, can I make a business out of this for whatever reason? Maybe because they're passionate about it, or maybe because their companies are letting them go, whatever the case is. And I said, okay, let me look at this again. And I said, talk to McGraw-Hill. And they said, yeah, we would do another edition of this thing. We see the numbers. We think that there's an opportunity here for the creator economy model, or whatever you want to call it. And I wanted to do it actually, Clint, because 2015, we had Google Plus in there. We had SlideShare in there. Those things don't even exist anymore. So I'm like, let's update it. There's things to do. And honestly, where it came down to it, like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a fine novelist. I'm not a great novelist. I don't know if I can impact many people, but for them to reading my mystery thriller of a marketing person that takes over his father's funeral home. Very interesting story, I know, but let's stop right there. I said, I think I can do a lot of good going into this new realm of content entrepreneurship. So McGraw-Hill's okayed the book. We started doing the case study, put some money behind a research project. I said, well, if we're doing all this, talk to my wife again, right? I'm like, maybe I should do this and start the business and whatever. And basically, I think she said, I'll say this nicely, she said, damn COVID, because that's the reason why we have the business right now, is because of COVID-19. I would not be doing this. I probably would be on my 3rd or 4th novel right now. So here I am, doing the whole thing again. Instead of targeting content marketers and enterprises, we're targeting content creators that are trying to build a sustainable financial business and live their dreams that way. And, it's strange how things work. But again, listening to the audience works every time.
And that takes me right to the next question, because what you write at the start of the book, and I thought it was a great quote, was that by focusing on building an audience first and defining products and services second, a person can change the rules of the game and significantly increase the odds of financial and personal success. So can you take us through why you believe that's the key? Because effectively that's flipping the model on its head relative to what people have historically done.
Yeah, it's different. And I talk about this in the book about the percentages against an entrepreneur. And what is it? If 50% survive 3 years, whatever it is, 50% after 3 years, 10% survive after 5 years. So basically, let's say that if you want to build your own business, you've got a 10% survival rate for financial success. And I'm like, well, that's horrible. I mean, that's not even minor league. You can't even make it to the majors with those kind of numbers. There's got to be a better way. And the idea is, okay, well, you have all these wonderful entrepreneurs with great business ideas, and they have an idea for a product or service. And then they go out there and they try to market that product and service, and they try to find the market fit, and they don't really know where their audience is, but they think they do. And they're putting a lot of advertising and marketing, and they're wasting a lot of money just trying to find all this stuff. And I'm like, and then 10% survival rate from that. And most of the time they pivot anyways, and they don't end up with that product or service. And they're like, okay, there's got to be a better way. And I said, okay, well, what if we do what I did and what thousands of other entrepreneurs out there are doing, is saying, okay, well, you have this great idea for a product or service. That's fine. But let's put the odds more in your favor. What if you targeted that audience with information to solve the needs of your customers that don't involve your product and service? So that would be helping them with something, or something that's really informational, entertaining. You create a podcast, you create a YouTube series, whatever the email newsletter, whatever it is that you create. You do that, build your audience, know that for the first year or so, it's going to be lean times. Prepare for that. And during those lean times, you're going to build that audience. And then once you understand that audience, build that audience, know them better than anyone else, and then that audience comes to trust you, love you, like you, whatever the case is, but they count on your content on a regular basis, then you'll be able to sell them pretty much anything. That might be the product you had in mind. And if it is, great. You've already done your marketing. You have your prospects. They're ready to buy from you, because they love you and they'll pretty much buy whatever you put in front of them. Or they give you, you talk to them on a regular basis, you know them, you know their pain points, needs, and desires. You go ahead and build the product or service, or monetize that however you need to based on what they tell you, and just listening to them. I think the challenge is people think it takes too long, which if you look at the numbers, it takes 2+ years to really start making it happen. And if you look at the research at the Tilt, 9 months to first dollar generally. You're 18 months until you start to hire some part-time people, and then you're about 26 months to building a sustainable ongoing business. I don't think that's all that bad. I think that's pretty good. The success rate is much higher then, because you've got low costs and you're building this amazing asset over time in that audience. And the only reason yes, you're talking about flipping the model, but I just think most people don't understand. This is just media 101. Most people don't realize it. They just think, build a business, I need a product. No, you don't. To build a business, you need an audience. You need a customer base. And then once you have that customer base, you can supply that customer base all kinds of products and services. So let's focus on the most important thing, the customer that has money. That's what we'll get first. And once we get that, then you can sell them whatever you want.
So we might as well start by getting into our first of the 7 steps, Joe, which is our sweet spot, which is really taking our expertise with what our audience wants. If I'm oversimplifying it, please jump in. But that drives a few questions in how do our listeners who are thinking about doing this, how do they first know, what are my strengths? What are my skills that I can offer to people? How do I have something that an audience would want?
No, you're exactly right. You explained that well. So the first thing you do is everyone starts, even for a product and service, you start with a sweet spot. So the intersection between our expertise and our audience's desire. So we got to first start on the expertise side. So what's something that I'm knowledgeable in, or what's something that I've got a higher skill base than most people do? And you list those things. So, I mean, I would write down, okay, I'm very knowledgeable in publishing. I understand business models pretty well. I understand the intersection between marketing and finance. I'll list the things that I'm halfway decent at. So you start to list those things over and over again. And then you match that up on the other side with, okay, who's the target audience that you're going for? And this is something that some people struggle with, because the more niche you can be with your audience, the better. So figure out, okay, who is that audience, and then what's their pain point in relation to what that knowledge is that you have. And then you bring that together and you say, okay, well, what's that story then? Am I talking about, is this the business model behind for content creators? That's what ours is at the Tilt. That's what we're trying to figure out. Are we trying to help engineers understand industrial soldering methods better, whatever it is? Or are you on the entertainment side? There's a great case study in the book for Ann Reardon. And, she talks about, okay, well, my audience wants downloadable recipes. They want to get that. I'm a really good dietitian. I'm a food scientist. So she brings that together, and then you got to figure out, okay, what's the story in that? We'll get to that. That's the step 2. That's the content tilt. But you figure out what that story is. And the problem is, Clint, is that when most people stop at, okay, here's the knowledge and skill area I'm great at. Here's my audience's desire. You'll end up with, let's just say something like cloud computing. All right, I'm targeting IT people. I know a little bit about the internet. I'm going to start talking about cloud computing 101, or why cloud computing is important. I'm going to create a blog, and we're going to do this every day and build an audience. Well, what's the problem with that? There's 1,000 people creating content on cloud computing every day. How are you going to differentiate? How are you going to cut through the clutter? So that's why you can't stop at the sweet spot, and you have to go to step 2, which is the most important. And that's the content tilt. And I'm probably stealing your thunder, because you were going to go into content tilt, but the sweet spot and the content tilt work together.
Yeah, and it makes absolute sense, because you actually phrase it that way, right? The sweet spot is not enough to differentiate our content enough. We have to break through the clutter. And the key is, this is what really has me thinking as I look to say, how would I do this? Because you talk about, how do you make your content different? You must fill a content hole that someone else isn't already filling. You must find a problem area that no one else is solving and exploit it with valuable information. And then, Joe, you offer some ways for us to explore how we could find that, because that, I think, is the hard part for the content entrepreneur to say, well, what can I offer that no one else is offering right now? And how can I become the leader in that area?
No, it's daunting when you say it that way, because you're like, how can I do that against all the, millions of content creators out there? How am I going to be different? So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you get to the smallest necessary audience possible. You can't go too niche. And so everyone wants to start out and go wide and say, oh, I want this big audience. But you'll never become super valuable to a wide audience unless you've been doing it forever, or you've got $1 billion in the bank. So what you want to do is focus on that niche audience and go smaller and smaller and smaller. So you might say, oh, well, I'm going to talk about, to this person, they're really interested in knitting. But are they interested in knitting? No, they're interested in knitting with this type of device. Are they interested with that type of device, or is it that type of device and this type of knot? I don't know anything about knitting. I'm just throwing this stuff out. But as you go through it, you're like, oh, okay, well, now I'm narrowing it down. It's this type of person with this type of need. They live in this area. Maybe they don't, or they have these kinds of pain points, these kind of financial issues. So you really start to figure that out, and you want to go so niche to a point where you can say, look, if I deliver consistently my podcast every week, and I do this for a long period of time, with this story that I'm going to tell to this audience, could I be the leading informational expert in the world? Now that, it's a big thing, but if your audience is small enough and you understand that audience better than anyone else, I think that's possible. I'll give you a really good example of how we had to pivot with Content Marketing Institute. We started, I told you the whole thing. We had the content tilt where we're going to be the leading, content marketing, education, and training site, which I thought at 2010, we could be the leader. Well, there's a company called HubSpot came along and started focusing on this thing called inbound marketing and dominated the small and medium-sized business market with the same type of content, but they called it inbound marketing. We called it content marketing. And I had to have a come to Jesus with myself and I'd just say, we can't be the best here. I don't have the resources. I don't think I can outpunch them. What do we need to do? And then I looked at the landscape and I said, they're focusing on small to medium size. Where's our opportunity? What we're best at is it with complex content challenges for enterprise marketers. Boom. So tilted a little more. Had the tilt, took it again, tilted again, and saying, oh, now we're we want to be the leading content marketing educational site for enterprise marketers. That little change made all the difference in the world, and that's the reason why we were able to have an exit in 2016. So that's just one way. Audience is my favorite way to go about that. We also use the other one, which is create your own category. You use things like Google Trends. You put in your topics. You see what's hot, what's trending, what's new, what people aren't thinking about. I mean, nobody was using the term content marketing. In 2007, we came out and I started blogging and I called it content marketing, like everybody's been using that term forever. It took 3-4 years for that thing to catch on, but boy, when it did, everything, because then when everyone was looking for content marketing, we came up. I still have, we don't own Content Marketing Institute anymore, but the last I checked, I did a post called What is Content Marketing? I wrote it in 2007. And today it still gets 500 people a day to that one page. Think about that. That's a great asset for them, which is awesome. So those are the things that we want to think about. Also could be platform. Maybe you're in the construction industry and you want to do something for homeowners on indoor air quality, but nobody's doing a podcast. So maybe you look at something like that podcast, or a gentleman named Hassan did that really well in politics on Twitch. Nobody was doing political commentary on Twitch. He said, oh, I can be on Twitch, and totally dominated. So there's just gamers on there. So there's a whole lot of people moving to Twitch right now and looking at that from that standpoint. So a lot of different things you can look at when you find your content tilt. But I like the question, if we told this story on a consistent basis in this platform, can we be the leading informational experts in the world about that topic? And if you're like, I think we can, if I think so, maybe not too confident, but you're somewhat confident, then you're close to the mark.
And so what we want to do is, and this is scary for people, right? Because you said most of us think we want to start really wide. And you're saying niche down, and not only niche down, keep niching down until you find your exact right, audience. Or you might even say, I probably started learning these things too late, Joe. I'd already, 10, 15 episodes in before I started thinking about it. But your avatar of who is my listener. And then every time you go to book a guest or have a conversation or do your marketing, you're saying, how does what I'm about to do speak to that avatar? How is this going to solve their pain point? So every time I release an episode, that audience member shares it with the 20 other, and I would have said people historically, but based on the demographics of my listeners, it trends more towards young men. So I need to think about, what are the pain points for those young men? What is it about my show that they're listening to? Using me as an example there, but for our listeners, whatever it is they're doing.
No, that's great. So there's a couple things to unpack there. First of all, when you're talking about the avatar, my friend Ann Hanley, who is an amazing marketer, writer, she has an email newsletter, and every time she writes it, she thinks of a specific reader. And she has that reader, and because she talks to her reader, we'll talk about some of this later maybe, but she talks to her readers on a regular basis. She has this one in mind. And so that very perfectly fills those needs because she has that avatar persona in mind as she's doing it. So that's one thing. Two, the second thing is, and you talked about you doing this, you have this in mind, this audience outcome. We can do this with any piece of content. So let's say you're writing an article and you're like, okay, well, here's the article. Here's the search engine keywords I'm targeting. You want to add to your little spreadsheet you're keeping, audience outcome. What's in it for the audience? This piece of content you're creating, what's in it for the audience? And I'm sure you did this with this podcast we're talking about. Okay, Joe's going to be on. He's got the Content Inc. model. What are those key things that I've got to make sure my audience gets out of these things? And that's what you do as a good interviewer. And you're going to pull that information out of me. So, because you already know the pain points of your audience. So the most important thing to get there is setting up what I call listening posts. So you do understand your audience better than everyone else. So that means if you know who your audience is, great. Can you follow them on social media? Can you listen to what they're saying? Can you be in a Discord group with them? Can you search for them regularly on Google? Can you do surveys to them? You know, if you're in a corporation and maybe you don't have access to your customers, you would talk to your sales team. You talk to your customer service folks and talk to, however you need to understand better. I mean, my best education when I was doing this is I went on reader calls. I was on the sales team. And I actually went on reader calls because I wanted to understand, and we were forced to understand what the needs of the readership was, so that when we were selling advertising, we could tell that story better. So that's what we have to do as content professionals. And it's a process. And if you set up all those things on a regular basis, it doesn't feel like work anymore because you're living every day on Twitter, on social, talking to customers. I mean, we have a Discord group for about 600 of our readers of the Tilt. This is the greatest customer research ever. They tell me exactly. I just have to watch the threads and I can see the problems. I can see, there's a podcast there. There's an article there. We got to do research on that. We have so many things we have to do and you have to prioritize, but it's an amazing opportunity.
And you probably see, Joe, as you were even saying that, my eyes were lighting up because I'm seeing what you're seeing in that if you have 600 people from your audience, once we cross a certain number, statistically, that 600 people is your audience, and they're telling you exactly what products they want you to launch next. So when you think of, well, how do I monetize something? And we're going to get into monetizing, of course, as we go. They're effectively giving you a monetization strategy and a long-term product rollout strategy, which is absolutely wonderful.
It's amazing. It's funny. I mean, people listening to this, it's a podcast, but you can't see this, but I have two monitors. I'm looking at you with one. The second monitor is our Discord channel. So I've got everybody's talking and they're doing their thing. And right below it is my roadmap.
And your roadmap evolves based on what you're seeing in that Discord.
Here's my audience. Here's who they are. Here's how we're communicating with them. Here's Discord over here. And here's all the revenue ideas. I'm listing them. And sponsorships. I want merchandise, ongoing training, coaching opportunities, events. And then I wrote down affiliate opportunities there, more books. I mean, this is just from watching this one little channel about all the things that we could use to monetize that they're telling me. And we've only been at this, by the way, for 6 months. So, and the monetization of this won't even start happening until 2022. So we haven't even gotten there, right? We're in the audience building phase, and I don't want to launch prematurely because I don't know if I quite have it yet. We're really darn close.
Which makes me wish I'd bought the Tilt tokens at 90 cents, but that's something.
That's a whole nother part of the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, not even going to the fact that, there are 30 something when I read that thread the other day, but just more hearing you talk about it and talking about the community and how the community drives the roadmap. You just, you see all the pieces falling in line and it makes absolute sense on where it's going, Joe.
But it's tough. So this is important for listeners. I'm confident because I've already been through it. I know, I'm uber patient right now because I know I have to be. But, when you have to pay bills and you're doubting whether or not you can do this, that's where you don't know. You don't know until you know. I didn't know that it was so close. Failure and success was September of 2009, and I'm ready to pack it in. And 6 months later, we were on our way to amazing success. 6 months! And almost gave up the whole thing. So you don't know. So now I'm in a better position. That's why I wrote the book and redid it in a lot of ways, because, as you know, I talk about patience a lot in the book, because I want to say this takes time. This is not a short-term thing. If you're going for a 6 or 9 month hit, I don't know how to do that. That's luck more than anything else. You might hit on a meme. It's not impossible, but that's not a business model that I know that there's a process to creating.
And you're absolutely right. I skipped over it because we dove right in, but I noted before you even laid out the 7-step model that we've already started discussing, you talked about the importance of patience. At the end of the book, you talked about the importance of patience, and then you went into, and we'll get to some of these later, 9 to 10 things we could be struggling with. But the first thing was patience. And so, we probably don't have to dive deeper into it than you already have by saying this is not a model you're building to hit a home run right off the bat. It's a patient process building over time before we're monetizing.
It's the slow burn, and it's almost you get to a point where I'm failing. Oh my God, how did we do it? We made it. I mean, that's pretty much how it is. But honestly, in looking at, we have the opportunity. We've done all this research at the Tilt. I've been doing this for 20 years now, talking to entrepreneurs. We got a pretty good feel for how long it takes. It took us 22, 24 months, me and the blog initially to make this thing go. John Lee Dumas, it took him, he was on Entrepreneurs on Fire, it took him the shortest. It took him about between 12 and 18 months to go. But if we look at all the case studies in the book, it's generally between 2 or 3 years before you feel like you have a sustainable business model.
2 to 3 years to build it.
2-3 years to build it. Yeah. And so we talk about, okay, what, first year, not much monetization. You start out trying, you're paying the bills, you're doing what you can. You get to the 2 to 3 where, I'm actually hiring some people here or some contractors here. Oh my gosh, I actually made money that month. You're doing those types of things. And then you get to that, if you do it right, and then you start to see hockey stick growth after that. If year 5, year 6, year 7, you can start looking at an exit, depending on what that is. I have a friend of mine that launched an Instagram, 2017, launched an Instagram page, daily picture. Last year had a best-selling New York Times coffee table book based off of that, and probably could sell his business now for $2 to $3 million. And I would imagine in 2 years that business will go for 10 plus, easy, because he's in all hockey stick growth. Already built the audience, already got 1 million people following on Instagram. Now you're just putting the pieces together. But it's the hard work up front to build the audience that takes most of that and teaches you that you have to wait.
And for our listeners, just so you know, because everyone just hears that and thinks, it's, all I have to do is put a photo a day and it's easy and I'm going to make money. If you've ever tried to grow a social media following of any sort, it is not easy work. And, I've been talking about this with my kids since they were 8.
They just say, just go viral. It's going to go viral.
Yeah, I want a YouTube channel, Dad. And it's like, okay, well, write a script. We'll record a video. Let's do it. Let's put the work in. And as soon as you tell them let's put the work in, they don't want a YouTube video anymore, Joe.
Oh, it is a lot of work. And it's to be on YouTube, you've got professional equipment. You've got to have your processes down. But just a reminder here, Mr. Beast is probably, top 5 most famous, generates the most amount of money for a YouTuber that's out there. What's great, and I love to do this, when you get an entrepreneur that doesn't know about the patience thing, I said, go into Mr. Beast's videos, go to number 1, and then go to 100, and then go to 200. He still hadn't made it. Go through. And what's great is from like 1 to 50, he's a gamer. He's doing really silly things. He doesn't know what his tilt is yet. He's trying to find it. He's trying to find his audience. He doesn't know yet. And then he starts getting it. And then he starts working it. And now, I don't know what he made. Like, he's worth billions of dollars now. Easy. He just started a hamburger chain as a YouTuber. So these are the types of things that I love, because you could be the biggest thing ever, but it even took Mr. Beast, the best in the world. It took him years to figure that thing out in 100 videos.
And I did the same thing, Joe, with a podcast, and I went and said, what was this person's first episode? I won't name the podcast per se, but I went back and looked at episode 1, and I listened to episode 1, episode 10, and this person has over 1,000 podcasts. And at some point, the guests that were on the show were just, I have no idea how, when you went back to episode 1 and then you went to episode 884, what happened in between, right? And everyone thinks they hit it overnight, but that they were podcasting in 2013. I didn't even know about podcasts until probably 2019, 2018, when I first started listening to Tim Ferriss on every run that I did. So that person had 8 years of patience, probably 6 of them before they were all of a sudden hitting home runs. And everyone just thinks, oh, they've always been knocking it out of the park.
But the good part is just about the business model aspect of it today. Yeah, you need a phone. If you're a podcaster, you need a really good microphone. But if you keep the cost low and you're smart about expenses, you can do this. You absolutely can do this. You get some revenue opportunities where you can. We call it survival monetization. You really take whatever you have to keep the lights on, but there's a there, it happens.
And we're going to talk about that part when we get to monetization. So we've talked about now figuring out who our audience is, what we're going to deliver to them because it's our expertise. We've created the niche. How do you answer the third question? Because you raise a very important third question. What is in it for the audience? How are we figuring out what they're getting out of our content?
That's absolutely where you need to set up the listening posts. And I'll give you, we do the same. We do this in our newsletter. I do it in my random. I got a personal newsletter that I do as well. Ann Hanley does this really well. She asks a question in every newsletter and she gets responses. So you actually have to do this and figure out what those, what are if you don't know, ask. It's just like if you want the sale. I say this to my kids all the time. I'm like, you're never going to get what you want unless you ask for it. So go and ask. So set up different places around where you can get that information that you want so that you understand what those outcomes need to be. Sometimes you're guessing, but if you have that, as you call it, an avatar in your head, you'll be able to deliver the right information. The other thing, we just talked about this, you might have to fake it for a while. So don't worry as you're starting your podcast. I'm the same thing. So Robert Rose and I on This Old Marketing podcast that we started again when I came out of retirement, we started in 2013 and we're coming up on our 300th podcast episode now. And we're terrible. I don't know how we built an audience. It's my first blog post. Oh, it's just hideous. So it's okay because everyone has to start at the first blog post, at the first article, at the first YouTube video, whatever. You work through those bugs, ask for the feedback wherever you can. Just make sure that you don't let the negative feedback hurt too much because you will get it.
And learn to live with the criticism. So you can almost keep it as simple as, let's say, you're on Instagram or you're on Twitter. You can almost ask the question of your audience, hey, what's your pain points, right? How can I help you, right? When you read what I write, what are you looking for? What problems can I help solve? Being as open with them as possible.
Yeah. My friend Jeremiah Aoyang, he's really big into Web3. I think every day he does a Twitter poll.
Every day, Twitter poll.
Yeah, it does a Twitter poll every day. I love formalized research. So that's in 2008, around that. I started a joint research project with some folks to figure out, okay, what is a content marketer? Now we're doing the same thing at the Tilt. What is a content entrepreneur? What are their pain points? How do they monetize? Those types of things. So, we were lucky enough. We got 1,400 responses. I have 1,400 responses from entrepreneurs that tell me what their pain points are. I can go to it anytime and see. So that having that, and then that's where you get to a point where what am I going to talk about next? Well, shoot, you have all this, you've set up this process of these listening posts. So use them and make sure. And, we talk about Marcus Sheridan, River Pools and Spas in the book. And he talks about, basically writing down all the questions your customers or your prospective customers might have. He says, write everyone down. And what he did, he wrote everyone down. He sold fiberglass pools. He wrote every question down they ever asked in any sales call he was ever on, and he answered everyone in an amazing blog post. And then, of course, that business went on to be the number one seller of fiberglass pools in the world out of Virginia, because whenever you typed in anything on the web, his post came up.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you also wrote in the book he had never actually installed a single pool.
No, he's the leading expert in the world on fiberglass pools, and he's never installed a fiberglass. That's even better, right?
Yeah, I thought that was one of the best lines.
He's a storyteller. Yeah.
Okay. So then we've got our audience. We're asking them what they want, what their pain points are. And something I found interesting that you wrote was that their wants are more important than their needs. Why are their wants more important than the needs?
If wants are driven in a lot of cases by emotion, and the best storytelling is emotional storytelling. Like, I'm under the assumption that you've got some dandy podcasts where you've got people like me that are pouring out their soul on their entrepreneurial journeys to find happiness. And you want to take them to that next level. So think about your audience and where do they, not where they need to go, because that's more of, what do I need to know for my job? What you want to say is, where do they want to go? What's going to help them live their best life? So not a need, but a want, but a desire. That's why when we talk about the sweet spot, I changed it in this version, and I changed it to not pain points, but desires. What is their desire? Because desire means, man, do they really, they don't need it, but man, do they want it. And they do a lot of things to get it. So that's why I like to focus on those things, because those are the things that really, those are the things, if you're viral, whatever viral means, those are the things that are shared when you're pulling at heartstrings. And content, even educational content, can do that. So that's why we like to tell little stories, failures, successes, and really put them into the story.
Wonderful. So because the desire in the emotion, we're going to sell that emotion, and that is going to open up more doors than simply giving them what they need.
Yeah, and we're human beings. Just what separates human beings from all other mammals? It's their storytelling mammal. We tell stories. So leverage that in everything you do. And you got to make sure. It's funny, going back to my cloud computing example. Like, literally, I've done this many times, as you could probably tell. But you go into some of the content under cloud computing. Oh, it's so dry and horrible. And I don't even know who their audience was. What were they thinking about this? Somebody did not like themselves who was writing these articles. And I'm like, they didn't have their audience's desires in their thinking when they wrote or recorded this. And that's where we get in the way, right? And that's where by the way, go back to the audience first model. That's where it helps. Because if you're so focused on the audience, what are you not doing? You're not focused on pitching your products and services. Where if you look at the majority of content that's created in the world right now, it's product content. Buy my thing, buy my service. Well, you can differentiate yourself because you're not talking about that. Because right now, all you're doing is building audience. You don't have a product. You can't even fall into that pit.
That brings us to the next step in the Content Inc. model, which is the base. Do one thing great. And you talk about, when we start, we have two choices we need to consider. How are we going to tell our stories? And then where will we tell our stories? And when we're looking at the how we will tell our stories, you have 6 principles that we need to follow. Do you want to share with us some of those things we need to be thinking about as we start to craft the story we're going to use to create our audience?
I don't even know what 6 things you're talking about. But you know what? I have it even better. So you're right. I'll break this down for you. So when we go into the base, we think because we can, we should, and we need to create on all these platforms, which is what most companies, I've worked with companies most of my life. So they feel like, oh, they got to be on TikTok. They've got to do the podcast. They've got to be on Twitter. They got to be on Twitch. They got to do all those things. Like, no. What we need to do, we don't want to be mediocre at all these things, which is what happens. We have a limited amount of content energy. We have to be great, remarkable at one thing, one or two things, but we like to say focus on being great at one thing. So as we talked about all these examples, like you're a podcaster, Mr. B started as a YouTuber, Huffington Post was a blog, New York Times was a newspaper. They're all diversified media companies now, but they all started doing one thing. So you figure out, okay, well, I'm doing, is it audio, video, textual plus image? What is my thing that my craft that I'm becoming good at? And then where am I going to put that audio, video, textual plus image? That is, you mix that with the content tilt and who your target audience is, and now you have the base. So it ends up being, I'm doing, audio, podcast, video, YouTube. I'm doing textual plus image, email newsletter. It's that one thing. And so instead of creating original storytelling on all these different platforms, you focus on being great at one, you build that base, and then you use whatever limited resources you have on, you say, I'm going to be on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever. Ultimately, the goals of those things are to build the other channel. So you're only focused on being great at one thing. And I don't know of another way to do it. If we look at all the case studies in the Content Inc. book, almost all the same, where they just do the thing. They do the blog, the newsletter, the podcast, the Twitch stream, the YouTube, whatever it is. And that's how they build the base.
And then if anything, they're on one social media channel and they're on that to drive content to what they're doing. So for example, if my one thing is my podcast, I want to grow it. It's a passion. I love it. Love having conversations with authors and effectively a book club with the author. But I want to drive traffic to it. Is my way of driving traffic through it simply through creating a great podcast and trying to market to it? Or do I find a social media channel to build a brand around to drive traffic to the podcast?
So it's a great example for podcasts, because basically what you see most podcasts doing is they'll say, oh, okay, I'm doing the podcast, which you're distributing through Apple Music, Spotify, whatever you have to. But the thing is the podcast. And then you might say, oh, okay, well, but I got to do the little video audio clips on Twitter, and I'm targeting business people. So I probably should do something like that on LinkedIn too. And then, oh, what about Facebook group? I should probably do something there as well. And then what am I going to do on YouTube? I mean, are they listening to me on YouTube? Do I do the video version? So it gets complicated. And then go to every other channel that you might have a list of another 5 or 6. And you're like, oh, we got to do something on those as well. Well, no, you don't. Actually, you need to choose. So you might say, look, I am going to, for you, I would say Twitter might be a really good choice for you. Like, I'm going to build an audience on Twitter. I'm going to have one interesting thing to say every day to build that. But then as I build that audience, I'm going to intersperse my podcast in there so they see that. Great. I'm going to go do that. And then ultimately that leads back to my main thing, the podcast. Fantastic. Like for the tilt, we said we're going to do the email newsletter. That's our base. And we're going to focus on being great at Twitter and LinkedIn. And we're not going to be on Facebook. And let's say we're not going to be on Instagram or whatever we decide to do. But it's to do those few things. It's not that you can't have some kind of put some detail into it where you could say, oh, okay, well, I want to at least be on Instagram, or I want to be on Facebook for my family, whatever. You could be on those things, but not for business. Like, what is your business goal?
Yeah, you kill it.
Yeah, how are you moving to that thing? Yeah, so just choose wisely. You have limited resources. And then as you go forward, there's a really great case study in the book, Accidentally Wes Anderson, and did all great on Instagram, not on Twitter. Had the thing on Twitter, had the name, great, whatever. So you got 1 million followers on Instagram. We got 5,000 on Twitter because we do nothing on Twitter. That's fine. Use it as a listening post. You don't have to be everywhere. And maybe someday as you're building this out, you might say, okay, we're going to take Twitter seriously. But if you don't have the resources to be great in all those channels.
Just hearing you say it, it's almost like a weight lifting off the shoulders. You mean I don't have to, every time I'm going to launch an episode, put out 33 things when putting them out myself. So it's just you want to find the time. I've got to read a book a week already.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Isn't it wonderful how great the other channels can be when you say, this is me, I'm not on Facebook or TikTok. Nothing. I've never even been on TikTok. I've only heard about it. And Facebook, I don't do anything but keep in touch with family. Nothing business related. Fine. That means I can be much, much more effective on LinkedIn and Twitter, which are my two go-to. Those are my two go-tos.
So max out or early on, focus in on one. Build it around one. You might add a second over time. And then the game obviously changes when your content entrepreneurs are at that level where they have an assistant or they have two assistants, and then you're able to have different people on the team helping out in different areas.
Absolutely. You get the resources and you have good reasons for it. You might say, oh, we need to look at a Facebook group because of this, this, and this. I mean, I wasn't going to get into Discord until I figured out, okay, well, I can see that model working. Okay, so my really, really good customers will drive them, audience will drive them to Discord so they can talk with each other. Be great for research, and also it'd be fantastic to understand our audience's needs better. And I'm like, oh my God, this is perfect. So we're diverting a little bit of attention from Twitter into Discord because that's where we're seeing more impact.
Well, they almost in some ways tie together. You find that a lot of the people that have Twitter communities are building them through Discord because they tie in really well together. And it seems some do Telegram, but it seems like Discord, from what I understand, may be the biggest one that I'm seeing people use. So that drives to now we've talked about really narrowing down and selecting one platform. When you write about choosing a platform, you give a person three things they want to think about: how we like to create content, what channel offers the best opportunity to reach the target audience, and this one felt important: what channel gives you the most control over presenting your content and building your audience. Do you want to share a little bit about why those three things matter when we're selecting what we're doing?
It's, the control thing is a big issue to look at because, and when I say control, I have more control over my email newsletter. I have more control over my website than I do over, let's say, my Facebook group, right? Because if I build an audience on so you might say, in looking at those three things, you might say, okay, well, Facebook group makes a lot of sense. My audience is there. I think we can deliver regular video content on that and build that audience, and that would make a lot of sense. So you might build a great audience there, but you don't have any control over it at the end of the day. So you have to keep that in mind. So you've got a lot of extra work to go down to move that at some point to something that's more controlled. And then if you do decide, like we have at the Tilt, to say, okay, well, we're going to do an email newsletter. Well, you start an email newsletter, you start a podcast, you're starting at zero. You got no distribution. Your audience, you got no findability there. You've got to do a lot of things and market in order to be found. So those are the things that you really have to figure out. And then the other thing is, sometimes you might not have the appearance or the composure to, let's say, be on video. Maybe you're better for radio, or maybe you're a better writer. It's okay. Like if you could make the decision to say, okay, well, what we really should do is an all-day stream on Twitch, but I hate being video and I don't want to lose my entire life. So maybe I'm just going to write because I really enjoy writing. I'm good at it. So maybe I'll do a blog, let's say, instead of doing this. So these are the things that you can figure out. Plus, you might say, oh, my audience isn't on Twitch. They do like textual content or email newsletters. They do open e-newsletters. Maybe that's an opportunity. So these are the types of questions you can figure out. But what ends up happening is you end up, you could really go into any channel and build your audience anywhere. You go with what you're probably the best at, most comfortable at, because this is what you're going to be doing every day for the next 5 years. So if you hate it on day one and you're not going to like it after that, it's going to be tough getting up every day and writing or doing the video or doing the podcast.
And something you talked about in there is different forms of or mediums of reaching your audience. And in your book, you refer to it as a hierarchy for your subscribers. And you talk about the fact that we want to move our audience or our subscribers up the hierarchy. And at the top, you had email lists and communities. So, for example, your Discord community. What is the hierarchy model? And why, Joe, do we want to move people from the lower side of the hierarchy up to that email and community on Discord or wherever we host it?
Back in 2014, 2015, I worked with, part of our consulting team worked with a big tech company. You would know the name of it. They had an amazing photography group that they'd built on Google+. Wonderful group, millions of customers. It was helping their business. They loved it. It was great until the day Google said that they were shutting down Google+. And you can imagine the creator and the champion and all the people that were involved in that to get to the 4 million people that are in that group. And then tomorrow it's dead. So that's out of our control as a content creator. You can build an audience on Facebook, on YouTube, on Google+, on LinkedIn, all those things, but you don't control the algorithm. You don't control who sees that content. And anyone that follows you, your fan or follower, are not your fans and followers. They're Facebooks, they're YouTubes. You're sort of renting them. So what we need to do is create a rent-to-own strategy. Now, if you've created with the more controlled elements up the subscriber hierarchy, so you've created, let's say, that email newsletter list, great. You're in really good position because you already control that. You've got their opt-in permission to send an email to them. Wonderful. If you, let's say, have a YouTube subscription, you got let's say 50,000 subscribers on that, which is great. You're doing well. You're building your audience. At some point, you've got to say, I've got to move that audience to something that I have control over and build an actual asset. And if you look at any great media company that's out there right now, they know they might have a YouTube channel. They might have a Facebook group. They might be playing around on TikTok. But why are they doing all those things? To build subscribers, specifically for the most part, email subscribers. If you look at the engine behind the major media companies like your Huffington Post, like your Insider, like your New York Times, Washington Post, anything like that, they're all run on email. Like New York Times is like 70 some different email newsletters that drive everything that they do and why they've made a great turnaround. So again, nothing wrong with being on social media. You can absolutely do that. But remember, you should have a strategy so that tomorrow, if you woke up and it was gone, what would happen? Like, what would you do? So let's prepare for that because that's going to happen at some point. They're going to change their algorithm. They're going to kick you off the platform. They're not good because they're large, big, centralized platforms that can do anything that they want. And, that's their right, by the way. That's their platforms and you're on there for free. You're not paying anything for it. So that's fine. They're letting you use it right now. You're getting some success. Be smart, follow the model, and move it over to something you can control.
So, Joe, this possibly can be one of the most important thing for listeners that already have a big following who aren't taking that step, because you listed a few of them right there. It could get shut down. They can change the algorithm. Some people you can get shadow banned. I know some people say shadow banning doesn't happen, but perhaps it does. Or you can get banned outright. The number of people who have 100,000 people in their account, or following, which is very valuable. And then they wake up and their account's been shut down and they didn't create that email list. Now you're starting over from zero. So we move from something where you're renting space. And I love it because I talk a lot about real estate. It's what I do for my day job. And so you don't want to rent, you want to own, you want to rent someone else.
So yeah, that's right. If you lease an apartment and you fix it up and it's beautiful, who does that help? The owner. That's right. That's right. So that's fine. If you know that if you want your space to be comfortable and you want to fix that space up so it's great, just know that you are helping Amazon and Google and Apple and all the rest of them.
And you nailed it when you said you're not paying anything for this, Joe. If we're not paying anything for it, the old adage, we are the content.
Yeah, you are the product. If you don't know who the product is and you're getting it for free, you're the product. Facebook is the best example of this in the world because basically you're giving up your data and they take that data and spit it back to you in advertising.
And my God, are they getting good with their advertising? I mean, a lot of people don't like it, right? They don't want them to have that data. I love it because the content that they're sending my way, it just happens quite a lot to be exactly what I'm looking for right at that point in time.
Of course it does, because they know everything about you. And you've given them permission to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, but I stopped. I try to not buy it, but I do like seeing some of those ads. Oh, it's so good. So that brings us to, so now we've got our tilt, we've got our base, we know where we're going to be building it, we know what we're going to be selling, or not selling, but putting out there. Now we actually have to create the content. And I loved your example with Norm from Cheers when you were talking about creating content, because there's two key things you said. Consistency, but two pieces. We have to show up reliably, same bat time, same bat place, and we have to put out great content that adds value every single time. Do you want to talk, Joe, about the content and why it's so important to be consistent and to hit both parts of that consistency chain?
It's so there's two reasons why Content Inc. programs fail. One we talked about is the content tilt. There's a lack of differentiation there. So for whatever reason, you haven't cut through the clutter. And the second is somebody's not consistent. You see it all. Go look at just about any company's YouTube channel. They're just, there's a video here and then 2 weeks and then there's 3 videos that pop up and then whatever. When I was in the business of doing content audits, I would always go in and we'd look at, okay, how are you delivering an email newsletter? The podcast, what's working? The blog, whatever. It's like you'd look at the blog and you're like, okay, well, there's a Friday post and then nothing for 2 weeks and then 3 on Thursday. And like, what happened? Like, oh, well, Bob was in charge of the blog and, he wasn't there that week, so we skipped it and whatever. I'm like, oh, geez. You miss a day, you might lose that audience forever. And this is just audience mechanics. This is just what happens. And just think about, like, I don't know if you used to get a print newspaper in the morning, but I used to get a print newspaper in the morning until one morning it didn't come. And then I'm like, oh, man. And then I didn't go out the next day. Because I was like, I lived that day. I didn't have it. And then I don't have it anymore. So, that's how it happens. You change that behavior in 2 seconds. If you have a podcast and they expect that podcast to go every Monday morning and that one Monday morning they're looking for it and it's not there, what are they going to do? Turn the channel. They're going to go find something else and you might lose them forever. So you've got to be consistent. And when you do, just like Norm, I love the Norm scenario. Was when I found out that example. I'm like, that's great. Norm comes in. He comes in at the same time. Everybody yells, Norm. And he always has something interesting to say. Go sit down and have his beer. We've got to be like Norm and do the same thing. It's not rocket science. It's just, when are we going to deliver? And when we're going to make that promise, that's a promise, a content promise to your customers, your audience. And then we're going to deliver on that until the data, whatever, tells us differently. If you found out something that you need to be more frequent or less frequent or whatever, but most of the time you're just going to stay on that like a ticking clock.
And so that raises a question. Let's say you have someone who has a podcast and you've had this in the past. And I think Tim Ferriss is roughly an episode every week and a half. So you're releasing roughly every 10 days. Is that dramatically different than releasing once per week? And is it even worse if you say, I'm going to try once per week, and then you realize, holy crow, it's hard to deliver one episode a week. I'm going to go back to once every 10 days. When you make that decision to go backwards, are you killing yourself?
It hurts a lot more. With the examples that we look at in the book, it hurts a lot more. So you want to start off with whatever the frequency is that you can deliver a remarkable piece of content. So if you're not sure, then do let's say every 2 weeks. Like when I was in retirement, coming out of retirement, whatever, I wanted to do a personal newsletter. But I didn't want to take up so much time. And I'm like, well, it should be a weekly, but I don't think I'm going to make the time or energy to do the weekly. I said, oh no, every other week, I think I can do that. So now I'm on, issue 71 of the random newsletter. It's gone pretty well. And I've done it every other week, and I like that, and it feels right, and the audience is on that, and great, set the expectations, I'm good to go. But if then I'd go back to a month, I'll get so many people say, hey, did you just quit with the newsletter? Are you done? Or you'll see your open rates go down. All sorts of horrible things can happen. So consistency is paramount.
And I thought you had a very good point while we're on email lists, because you talked about how important they were. And I hear the same thing from quite a lot of people. And then there's those people who say email is dead. And what you wrote in there was, don't you have those 2 or 3 that you always read? And you're right. I think I have 3 that every week, it's almost calling it a highlight may not be the right word, but it's like I make sure I read those ones every single week because the value I get out of them is very, very high. And some of them are much shorter than your average one, which may help.
It may. If you're going to do an e-newsletter, just on e-newsletters, you want to have something original in it. Short, long, whatever. You can't just repurpose blog posts like what a lot of people do. But I have my 2. I have Morning Brew and New York Times that I read every day. Every morning, just to make sure I'm not missing anything in the news. So I'm going to read those 2. And that's great. I got a couple other business ones that come in the afternoon that I read. But I love that question because when people say, oh, email, I'll find some email that they religiously open. Absolutely. And then they'll say, oh no, Gen Z or millennials don't open email. Not true. They open email up just like everyone else once they get an email address. I mean, if it's Gen Z, they don't have an email yet. But as soon as they get into the workforce, they get an email. So yeah. And then they start opening email newsletters just like everyone else. You know what's funny is, look, if you don't believe in the power of email, to sign up on any social media network, what do you have to have? An email address.
Email address. Absolutely.
That's right. Email is the core to everything we do for content creation.
And now almost all of them just give you the opportunity to log in through your either Google or through your Facebook. But to get into Facebook, you have to have your email. So it's prevalent. And even to your point, exactly right. Young people who are on my team, I forward them a email newsletter that I enjoy, and quite often they become religious readers of the same one. So I think you're absolutely right on that. The something I found interesting that you talked about on audience was stealing audience. And I know you meant that in the nicest of ways. But do you want to talk about how we can use other people's followings to build our own following?
So if we're in audience building mode, and the best thing you can do is be on other people's content. I think in the book I probably dated myself and say you're down with OPC, and that's what we want. Somebody asked me the other day, it's like, well, if I have an e-newsletter, how should I do that? And if I have a podcast, how should I do that? Okay, well, you have an e-newsletter, you should figure out partnership programs with other email newsletters that target the same audience. If you're a podcaster, you should be on other podcasts as guests with the same audience. YouTubers do this really well. You got whole influencer networks on TikTok and YouTube that work together so that they are getting in front of each other's audiences and stealing each other's audiences. They're not saying stealing, but that's what they're doing. So when we started, Content Marketing Institute, we had a list of the top content marketing blogs. It was 42 blogs. These were all of our competitors. We listed them on a page. We didn't even list our own blog. We listed all of them on a page. But then when and we basically had a partnership program with each of them to work with them in some way. We shared, they shared, and, rising tide lifts all boats. But the great thing is when somebody typed in top content marketing blog, they went to our site, right? That's what we want. So anyways, if you're really stuck and trying to figure out how do I market my thing, you say, okay, who's also doing the same thing that I am, and how can I work with them? And I love the whole, I don't want to be, it's a cooperative approach. It works really well when you talk, and you know this, you talk to other podcasters, they're really open. Oh, you would be on my show, I'll be on your show, we'll do this, we'll do some co-marketing. And those are the things you want to set up, probably the most important marketing you'll do.
Yeah, I think great young guy I've met through social media. He set up a Discord channel for about 7 of us that are podcasters. And we're looking at how do we get together in a social media way on a weekly or bi-weekly basis where we're just having a conversation and then we're building an audience around that. And then that audience will be driven to our various podcasts. So how do we, exactly to your point, how do we grow each other together? So it's a beautiful point. So let's talk about monetization, because this is what a lot of people get into it for. I'm into a lot of this stuff just for passion and enjoyment, but at some point having it not cost you money and making, hobby money is a good spot to start. For other people, this is their business. This is what they want to do. So they need to be making money from it. You talk about the fact that A, it's going to take us some time. We have to be patient. 2, we have to find the right monetization model. And then something I found really valuable, you talked about MVA. Can you share with our listeners how that works and how we're going to start making money?
So the MVA is minimum viable audience, just like somebody would have a minimum viable product. And the same thing is, it's the smallest possible audience that we need in order to monetize. Sometimes this is a number that makes sense. I'll give you an example. When we, with Content Marketing Institute, I wanted to, when it got to that point in figuring this thing out, I said, if we get to 10,000 is the right number for email subscribers. And why was 10,000 be an MVA? Because I know the rates that email newsletters get. I know how buyers are, and 10,000 is kind of the minimum starting point for people to consider sponsoring an email newsletter. Great. If you talk to Michael Stelzner at Social Media Examiner, he set 10,000 as well as his number, and then he wanted to monetize up to that point. If you look at Matthew Patrick for Game Theory, he set his number at 1 million before he wanted to. 1 million subscribers before he wanted to monetize. Why that works, if you can stretch it out as long as possible, because all you're doing is focus heads down on building audience. This is the greatest thing for, my team right now at the Tilt, where I'm just saying all we're doing is trying to get to 10,000 subscribers right now. Heads down. We're not selling anything. We're not looking to where the sponsor insertion is supposed to be. We're not getting calls from sponsors. We're not doing anything. We're just focusing on maintaining or getting new subscribers and keeping those subscribers. That's it. So that amount of focus is very powerful. So I like the MVA for focus. And then you're also like, well, if we want to have a sponsorship of our podcast, of our YouTube channel, whatever, we probably can get to whatever level, let's say it's a B2B YouTube series, maybe 5,000 or 10,000 are your subscribers. If it's consumer, maybe it's 50,000, 100,000, something like that. You should be able to find out what's going on in your industry and what that number is. But I love it. Not just for, I have to wait to monetize to this point. I love it for heads down. I think you'll be faster at delivering on your audience goals if you focus on that and don't just get interrupted with, oh my God, I've got to sell ASAP or I'm going to be broke.
And then once we get to that number, what should the content entrepreneur be thinking about in terms of how am I going to monetize this? So we've got our listening posts. Our listeners are telling us, hey, here's what I want. How am I turning that into money in my jeans?
Yep. So once you get to that level, you're at that point saying, okay, I can turn on the revenue juices now. You can't do it all at once because you probably won't launch it perfectly. It takes you a few months to figure out the bugs. I like 9 months in between each revenue.
In between. Okay. So just focus on one at first.
You don't have to believe me on that. I've seen it done multiple different ways. I've seen people come out with, for example, somebody might say, I'm launching an event. Well, an event, you're launching, paid attendees. So you've got that revenue channel. You've got sponsorship revenue. You might have other partnership revenue. You might have premium content. So you could launch 4 or 5 with one thing that you do. That said, let's say that you're going to start and say, I'm going to launch an affiliate program. Well, it takes a while to figure that out. What are the products I'm going to sell? Who are the affiliates that I'm going to work with? Do I need software to do it? How does that work? Do I put it in my email newsletter? How does it work on my podcast versus my email newsletter? You got all kinds of things, right? So you might say, I'm going to take a couple months, figure that thing out, get some revenue in. Good. We got that working. Got revenue. Here's our growth plan for that one. It takes you about 6 to 9 months. Then I'm going to launch that second one. The importance of diversifying the revenue. And by the way, we know this from the research, the average successful content entrepreneur has over 4 different revenue paths. So they might say, and I'll go through them all just so we can see what the options are. So once you build that loyal audience, you got your minimum viable audience, you've got 6 direct ways. You've got advertising and sponsorship. You've got a conference and event you could run. You've got premium content like a book or an ebook you could sell. You could take donations. Nothing wrong with that. If you've got an amazing mission and you're taking a donation, you could do Kickstarter or something like that. You've got an affiliate program that we've talked about, affiliate marketing. And then you could also sell subscriptions. So maybe you have a Substack email newsletter and you want to sell subscriptions on a monthly basis or whatever, an annual basis. You can do that. So that's the 6 direct ways. And then you've got the 2 indirect ways, which are ultimately, if I really create a loyal audience, I can sell a product. So for me, back in the day, I could say, I'm going to sell my matching service lead gen product that people will hopefully sign up to, but they never did. Or you could say, I'm going to sell a service, which you could sell consulting services, coaching services, which is very, very common in the content entrepreneurship space. Because, I'm sure you get that all the time. Somebody might call you and say, do you do coaching for, in podcast development or this type of interviewing or whatever it is, right? You might take that on as a business. So 8 solid ways for entrepreneurs to look at options. And then there's variations of those as you go. When we got to the 2015 Content Marketing Institute, we probably had 13 or 14 different ways we were driving revenue. And my favorite is, of course, a physical event, because you can get scale and profitability if you do it right and you really build an audience. But that's and of course, right now, big opportunity there as we get back to maybe whatever the new normal is into 22 and 23.
And there may be an opportunity to pick up some event businesses that have been on the ropes for 2 years. I mean, it's always hard to look at the ways to take advantage of a negative scenario, but as a business person, you could say, hey, the last 2 years have been rough in these industries. There may be an opportunity for me to get in.
Huge opportunity in events. And this is going to sound silly, but I think there's a huge opportunity for print magazine today. It's a different support vehicle. You would need to get a group of sponsors to help support it. But the fact is, we've never seen anything like this, where we still have the post, but nobody sends anything valuable through it anymore. So it's like, okay, where can I reach my audience directly? Absolutely every day or quarterly, let's say every quarter. And I have that information and there's no competition. Oh, okay. Print. That's where we're at with print right now. So it's funny that we're all fighting for, YouTube space and podcast space. And it's very competitive and there's nothing happening in print. So watch that happen. Watch that turn very quickly.
Makes sense, because ideas floating in the head. But so why do we, we've spent so much time niching down, right? And we want to get tighter and tighter and tighter. We want to do our one thing. We want to have our base. And then all of a sudden we get to the revenue, and sure, maybe we just start with one, but then it's quickly, all right, we need to diversify. Why do we want to diversify when we've spent so much time focusing in? What's the importance of that diversity when we get to that stage of the game, Joe?
Okay, so you have to get to that one thing, you have to be focused. You have limited resources. I mean, if we could come out the gate and do the podcast, the YouTube, and the Twitch stream, amazing all at one time, then that's what we would do. But we can't. It can't be done. I've never seen anyone do that, even with larger budgets, because the focus isn't there. It's not there at all.
The focus isn't there. So it's not that we didn't want to do it to begin with. It's that we needed to focus in and zone in to build. And then once we've built, and we're getting money in the door, which you talked about. Now we can afford a few things. One, we can afford people, can afford to build a team. And once we have the team, then we're able to say, well, my job now isn't the guy who's writing every tweet, putting together every single photo. My job is to hire people, get them to create content for me. And my job is effectively, if this is the spot I take, to make sure that everything that goes out under my brand's name, I approve.
Yes. And strategically, I mean, this is, by the way, this is not rocket science. This is what all media companies do. But if you look back, I mean, we have actual data on this because I wanted to find out. So when we launched the first 22 months of Content Marketing Institute, all we did was the blog. Blog. Added the e-newsletter component. It's like, good. Now we got that own. Great. That's wonderful. Then we're going to launch the magazine that we talked about. Great. We're going to launch the event. That's fantastic. Then we're going to launch the podcast. Then we launched the webinar series. Then we launched this whole new thing of research. Then we launched the West Coast event. So we were doing a lot. So that's in, basically 6 years. We added all these components to it. Now there's two reasons. One, those are all revenue generating. So we're diversifying and creating new revenue opportunities at the same time. The second is, and this is maybe the most valuable, we did research and it took us years to find this out. But I wanted to know who is our most valuable customer. Who's the customer that pays every year for stuff? And who's the customer that increases their yield every year? Like, who is that? I want to know. And the only thing that we could find was they were subscribed to at least 3 things that we did. They listened to the podcast. They subscribed to the email newsletter. They were on the Twitter chat, right? Okay, that's one example. One was subscribed to the print newsletter, went to the event, listened to the webinar series. Whatever, didn't matter which 3. It was 3. So what happens is that's how you create the best customers that buy the most stuff from you, because they so believe in what you're doing. They want to be part of everything. So you launch your podcast, then you're going to do your podcast mastermind group. Then you're going to do your in-person event around a bunch of different themes that you talk. Maybe you'll have a Discord thing. You'll have a number of things. You'll find out that your best customers are the ones that are subscribed to the most things that you do. And that is media. That's exactly how it plays out. So again, new revenue opportunities, great. That's what we want. But at the same time, we're basically creating our optimal customer that wants to spend a lot of money with us.
And that's more powerful than the incremental revenue we get from that new line of business, because effectively, when you listed those things, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, right? We had all the things down the left. I wrote them on the left side of the page. Ad sponsors, conference events, donations, premium content, subscriptions, affiliate marketing. And then on the right side of the page, I wrote products, services. And effectively, if we're getting the person to tick 2, 3, 4 of the things on the left side of the page, when we go to bring out a high dollar product or service, what you're saying is those people who were in 3 of our channels are the ones who are more likely to buy that product or sign up for that service.
Not necessarily the revenue stuff. It would be the diversification. So we're talking about 2 things, which are really important. You've got revenue diversification, but at the same time, you need platform diversification.
Sorry. So they're on 3 platforms. They're more likely to buy the product or pay for the service.
That's exactly right. So you're going to create that, whatever that avatar is, that persona is going to be. You're going to say, okay, well, we're doing the podcast and the email newsletter. If we do the YouTube series and we can get our customers to engage in that too, what do we want to know? We want to know, are we creating better customers? Are we moving customers? Are they spending more money with us? So, we looked at yield all the time because I'm like, okay, well, if they're spending $900 with us a year, how do we get them to $1,100 with us a year? And generally what we need to do is we say, okay, I got to get them from just subscribing to the email newsletter to getting active in something else that we do. So that's why we have these other options for them to get involved in. So when I'm sending them a newsletter or we're talking about something on the podcast, I don't want to necessarily focus on here's the revenue stuff. I want to focus on here's other things that you could subscribe to get more involved in the community.
Here's other ways I can add value to your life.
That's right. You need more help here? We got this new show for you. You need more help here? We've got this email newsletter for you. We need all that stuff.
And the key, and I really valued this in the way that you went about it in the book, Joe, is realistically, we're not saying that purely to get those dollars. That's a great byproduct. But a big part of being that content entrepreneur is we really do want to provide that value to the audience, right? Because if we're going to be successful, whatever we're bringing forward, it has to be something that we really want to bring forward to that person. To your point, you can't do something for 5 to 7 years that you really hate.
That's the mission, right? The mission is focused on not you becoming the millionaire. I mean, that may be one of your goals, but the mission is we're trying to solve these pain points on a regular basis for that audience. And if you do that better than anyone else, book it. You'll be financially successful. No doubt about it.
And that brings us to the last step in the Content Inc. model. Sell or go big. Do you want to share what we're thinking about when we get to this stage of the game?
Well, again, you could have an exit like we did, a very successful exit in 2016. And that was planned. Like we wanted to always sell. That was always the thing. We wanted a financial exit. We wanted to not be working full time when the kids were in high school, all those things. And that worked out great. But that was the goal. So some people say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how much money. And we knew exactly how much money we needed. Like we set our goal at 15 million because we said, okay, well, I talked to my accountant. And my accountant said, well, I wanted 10 million. He said, you need about $10 million after if you want no concerns for the rest of your life. He said, so you're going to have to ask for 15 so that after taxes, you get the 10. I'm like, okay, we could do that. So that was the number. It was 15 million. So we knew that we couldn't sell the business until we got to a valuation of in excess of 15 million. So that didn't work out until 15. And then we went up and started the sales process at 15 and sold in 16. Now, some people might say, I'm not selling this thing. I want to create a lifestyle business or I want to go big. Like we talked about John Lee Dumas and Entrepreneurs on Fire. He'll tell you he loves making his millions of dollars every year. And I could say it because if you go on his website, he'll tell you how much he makes every month from his podcast. And he doesn't want to sell and he just wants to live this life. He's got like 4 people working for him. Life is great. He's living in Puerto Rico. Perfect. That's what John wants to do. Some people might want to say, I want to build the next New York Times. I want to build the next Washington Post, or BuzzFeed, whatever it is. So we want to go big. So like we talk about Matthew Patrick and game theory, he's really trying to build this huge media enterprise around food and games. And he's got all sorts of YouTube channels and networks set up. Great. That's what he wants to do. So that really goes back to, what is your goal in life? Get back, what do you want to do with your family? How much time do you want to have? Who do you want to affect? So we go back to even the start of the book where I talk about setting up your goals. So you should know, before you get an offer from somebody for your business, which will happen when you get successful. It surprised the heck out of me when we got our first $1 million offer. I didn't see it coming, but we knew that, $1 million wasn't going to suffice because we know exactly how much we would sell for. And if that number was that number at that time, we would have sold. So you got to make a decision on what's best for you and when you want that to happen.
And so the last question there for you, because we're at the end of the book and, you did talk about patience again, and we talked about that earlier. But then you talked about some of the roadblocks that may be stopping us or maybe resulting in us not being as successful with the Content Inc. model as we'd like. What are some of the more obvious ones, or not obvious, but the more common ones that you see, Joe, that stop people?
In a lot of cases, content entrepreneurs don't get their expenses right. They don't plan, it almost all comes back to patience, but they're not planning like this. We would have never made it if we didn't sold our car, went down to 1 car. We were very careful about what we spent. We took a lot of smaller vacations. didn't go places. So you've got to figure out your expenses because it's going to be a couple of lean years. The second thing is that a lot of content entrepreneurs, they want to do everything themselves. And you have to figure out what's a good use of your time and what's not. There's a lot of freelancers and contractors that you can outsource to. So, by the way, just because I'm saying that we've got to cut expenses doesn't mean that you shouldn't outsource. You should outsource everything that you're not good at and everything that you hate doing, because there's people that will do that right now today for reasonable prices. So figure out what that is. If that's putting together your podcast or proofing your email newsletter, or I don't know anything about websites, so I have to have some really smart people deal with all the website stuff. So these are the most important things. So you want to outsource as quickly as possible. Figure out what you're great at, what you like to do, and outsource everything else so that you make it the whole way and get up excited to work on your project that you're building that's going to help a lot of people long term. And you've got to make sure you help yourself. And then the other thing is, and this is a mixture of chapters and whatnot, but I'm really big on goal setting. And you should spend some time up front figuring out what you want for your life, from career, family, physical, spiritual, mental. What are those goals? How are you going to be a good, well-rounded person? Because it's easy to get sucked in and going off the deep end and just focusing on one thing. Like, you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to still live my life? Because this is all encompassing. It doesn't have to be. You can, I mean, it was when I left corporate world and went and started to create the blog and the whole thing, I thought, oh, I got to work from 8 to 5 because that's what I worked before. And then I realized that, oh my God, what worked better for me is working from like 6 to 8, and then I'm off playing with the kids from like 8, 9 and whatever. And when they're going off to school then, and then, having lunch with my wife, and you could create a whole amazing new schedule. So those are, based on what's important to you and what's going to make you happy and how you're going to positively affect other people.
And I'm remiss because we skipped right over the goal setting section, and you started with yeah, we got it in there because you had begin with the end in mind, which is one of the most powerful things we can ever do in any of this. Joe, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for your time late at night on the East Coast. Is there anything that we missed that you want to make sure we leave the listeners with as it relates to becoming a content entrepreneur?
No, we actually ended with the most important thing, which is figure out those goals, write them down like on a piece of paper, not on your mobile phone, and review them every day. Now, I like to review them in the morning and right before you go to sleep at night, because your brain does crazy things and they work on in your head and you wake up with a great idea, which worked for me. And these things are fluid, they can change, but probably the most important thing, Stephen Covey book, and love a number of other 10X by Grant Cardone was a great one that I looked at, and I sort of created a little process that made sense for goal setting. And the research that's out there on reviewing your goals on a regular basis is non-refutable in my opinion. And all successful people that I know that are really successful, they've got their goal setting book and they review it on a regular basis. So figure that out before you go any farther.
Yeah, I agree. I'm absolutely religious in my goals, whether it's personal, professional, financial, and review them on the regular. So, breaking it right down to what are my daily habits to make sure that mine came from 7 habits and building it up that way. But if I'm hitting the daily habits weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, it all just falls into place. So build it backwards.
It all just works out. And the great thing is if you read them in the morning too, you don't get sucked into email and distractions quite as easily. She's like, oh, I just read that that's my career goal, and I'm here fiddling on, what am I going on TikTok for? Stop it. Yeah, I'm not going to make my goals.
Yeah, that was powerful. I like that. Excellent. All right, we'll end it there. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Pursuit of Learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.